Tonight, we'll take you on another quiet journey through time, into one of history's more brutal chapters, told gently so your mind can rest while the past unfolds. So here you are, Achilles, finally camped outside the walls of Troy after months of accidental detours and divine complications. The greatest fortress in the world rises before you like a challenge carved in stone, its massive walls gleaming in the morning sun, practically daring the Greek army to try their luck against centuries of architectural confidence. Any reasonable commander would spend time studying those defences, planning siege strategies, perhaps engaging in some preliminary skirmishing to test the enemy's responses. You, however, have never been particularly burdened by reasonableness. Instead, you wake up one morning, look at Troy's imposing fortifications, and decide that what this war really needs is a practice round, because obviously, before tackling the most heavily defended city in the known world, you should warm up on something a bit more manageable. Something like the nearby city of Lyrnessus, which has the dual advantages of being significantly less fortified than Troy, and conveniently located for a quick military exercise. "We're going to attack Lyrnessus," you announced to Patroclus over breakfast, as casually as someone might suggest a pleasant afternoon hunt. Patroclus pauses with his bread halfway to his mouth, studying your expression for signs that this might be an elaborate joke. When he finds none, he sets down his food with the careful deliberation of someone who's learned to recognize the warning signs of impending chaos. "Lyrnessus," he repeats slowly. "The city that's been quietly minding its own business and hasn't actually done anything to provoke us." "Exactly," you reply, apparently missing the implicit criticism entirely. "Perfect for a test run. Plus, I heard they have some interesting acquisitions available." There's something in your tone that suggests this decision isn't entirely motivated by military strategy. Patroclus, who's gotten quite good at reading your various moods over the past months, recognizes the particular quality of enthusiasm that usually precedes complicated situations. "What kind of acquisitions?" he asks, though he's clearly not sure he wants to know the answer. "The usual. Gold, weapons, cattle." You pause, examining your spear point with perhaps unnecessary attention. "Possibly some high-quality prisoners who might prove valuable." "Ah, so this isn't really about military strategy at all. This is about the ancient and thoroughly problematic tradition of acquiring war prizes, which, in Bronze Age parlance, includes everything from livestock to people, often with little distinction made between the categories." Patroclus gives you the look of someone who's just realized his friend is about to make a decision that will probably create more problems than it solves. "Achilles," he says carefully, "are you sure this is the best way to begin our assault on Troy?" "It's not beginning the assault," you correct him with the kind of logic that sounds reasonable until you think about it too carefully. "It's preparing for the assault. Very thorough preparation." And so, with the kind of reasoning that would make military historians weep into their scrolls, you convince a significant portion of the Greek army to join you in what amounts to a shopping expedition with extreme violence. The attack on Lyrnessus begins at dawn, because dawn attacks are traditional, and you've always been one to respect the classics. The city's defenders, waking to find the greatest hero of his generation leading an assault on their walls, probably spend a few moments wondering what they could possibly have done to deserve this level of attention. The answer, of course, is nothing. They've simply had the misfortune to exist in the general vicinity of your warm-up exercises. The siege is brief but thorough. Lyrnessus's walls, while respectable, weren't designed to withstand the focused attention of someone with your particular skill set. Your spear finds gaps in their defences with the kind of precision that comes from divine enhancement and 13 years of centaur training. Your sword cuts through their resistance like a farmer's scythe through grain. It's almost unfairly one-sided, really. The defenders fight bravely, but they're facing someone who's essentially a walking force of nature with anger management issues and a god complex. The outcome is never really in doubt. By midday, Lyrnessus has fallen. By afternoon, your men are systematically looting everything that isn't nailed down, and quite a few things that are. By evening, you're standing in the city's main square, surveying the spoils of your completely unnecessary victory. That's when you see her. Briseis is everything you'd expect from a Bronze Age noblewoman, and absolutely nothing like what you'd prepared yourself for. She's beautiful, certainly, the kind of beauty that belongs in epic poetry, with dark hair that catches the light and eyes that hold intelligence and fury in equal measure. But there's something else about her, something in the way she holds herself despite being surrounded by the wreckage of her city, that suggests depths you hadn't anticipated. She's also, quite clearly, not thrilled about her current circumstances. "You," she says when your eyes meet across the square, and her voice carries the kind of controlled anger that's somehow more intimidating than screaming would be. "You're Achilles." "I am," you reply, because denying it at this point would be both pointless and somewhat insulting to your reputation. "The great hero," she continues, and the way she says "great" makes it sound like a criticism rather than a compliment. "The legendary warrior who attacks cities that never threatened him." It's a fair point, and one that you're not entirely sure how to answer. Military strategy seems like an inadequate explanation for what amounts to a violent shopping expedition. Divine destiny feels too grandiose for what was essentially an impulse decision made over breakfast. "I'm building a reputation," you say finally, which is at least honest, if not particularly flattering. "Congratulations," Briseis replies with the kind of dry sarcasm that suggests she's not impressed by your career goals. "I'm sure the widows and orphans will be thrilled to know they contributed to your personal brand development." There's something about her complete lack of deference that's both infuriating and oddly refreshing. Most people either worship you as a legendary hero or fear you as an instrument of divine wrath. Briseis apparently has decided to treat you as what you actually are, a young man with too much power and not enough wisdom. "You're coming with me," you announce, which is perhaps not the most romantic way to begin a relationship, but is certainly direct. "Am I now?" she asks, and her tone suggests that she has some opinions about your assumption. "You're a valuable prize," you explain, apparently operating under the theory that clarifying the transactional nature of the arrangement will somehow make it more palatable. Highborn, intelligent, beautiful, the sort of acquisition that reflects well on the conqueror. Briseis stares at you for a long moment, and you get the distinct impression that she's cataloguing all the different ways you've just insulted her in a single sentence. "An acquisition," she repeats slowly. "A prestigious one," you clarify, because apparently you've decided that doubling down on the objectification angle is the way to win her over. "How thoughtful of you to add prestigious to acquisition," she says, with the kind of smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "I feel so much better about being treated like livestock now." This conversation is not going the way you'd envisioned. In your imagination, there had been more grateful acknowledgement of your prowess and less pointed criticism of your approach to human relationships. But then, most of your social interactions recently have been with soldiers who either fear you or worship you, neither of which is particularly conducive to honest feedback. "It's not like that," you protest, though you're not entirely sure what it is like, if not that. "Isn't it?" Briseis asks. "You attacked my city, killed my defenders, and are now informing me that I belong to you. What would you call it?" "War," you say, because it's the only answer you have, and it's technically accurate, even if it's not particularly satisfying. "Ah, yes, war," she agrees with a nod that manages to be both understanding and deeply sarcastic. That famous excuse for all manner of behaviour that would be unacceptable in any other context. You're beginning to understand why Patroclus looked concerned when you announced this expedition. Military victories are supposed to make you feel triumphant, not like you're failing a philosophical examination you didn't know you were taking. But the deed is done, the city is conquered, and Briseis is, whether she likes it or not, your prize. The Greeks have very specific ideas about the rites of conquest, and those ideas don't include consulting the conquered about their preferences. That evening, as your army settles down to enjoy the spoils of their victory, you find yourself in the awkward position of trying to figure out what to do with a war prize who clearly considers you a barbarian with good publicity. "This is your tent?" Briseis asks, examining your accommodations with the critical eye of someone evaluating a prison cell. "It's comfortable," you reply defensively, though you're suddenly aware that what passes for luxury in a military camp might seem rather basic to someone accustomed to palace life. "I'm sure it is," she agrees, with the kind of politeness that's somehow more cutting than direct insult. "Very, Marshal." You spend the evening in awkward silence, punctuated by meals that feel like negotiations and conversations that sound like diplomatic incidents. Briseis answers your questions with the minimum politeness required to avoid outright confrontation, offers observations that feel like veiled criticism, and generally manages to make you feel like an uncouth barbarian, despite being the one with the divine bloodline and legendary reputation. It's profoundly unsettling, really. You've conquered cities, defeated heroes, and accumulated enough glory to last several lifetimes, but somehow one intelligent woman with a talent for sarcasm has managed to make you question whether any of that actually makes you worthy of respect. As you settle down for the night, listening to the sounds of your army celebrating their victory, you reflect on the strange turn your life has taken. You came to Troy to win glory and fulfill your destiny. Instead, you've acquired a war prize who seems determined to treat you like a disappointing student in a class you didn't know you were enrolled in. Still, there's something about her that you can't quite dismiss. Maybe it's the intelligence in her eyes, or the way she refuses to be impressed by your reputation, or the simple fact that she's the first person in months to treat you like a person rather than a legend. Whatever it is, you suspect that Briseis is going to complicate your life in ways you haven't anticipated. Because nothing says successful military campaign like acquiring a war prize who's clearly smarter than you are and isn't afraid to demonstrate it. The success at Linnasusus, such as it was, has given you a taste for this whole conquest business. There's something deeply satisfying about the straightforward nature of siege warfare. You identify a target, you attack it, you win, and then everyone has to acknowledge your superiority. It's much simpler than the complex politics of coalition warfare or the philosophical challenges posed by sarcastic war prizes. So naturally, you decide to make it a regular hobby. "We're expanding operations," you announce to your myrmidons one morning, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon where several more cities wait in blissful ignorance of their impending doom. Your men receive this news with the enthusiasm of professional soldiers who've discovered that their commander has a talent for profitable ventures. Successful raids mean plunder, and plunder means they can afford better equipment, finer food, and the kind of luxury items that make military life bearable. Patroclus, however, looks less enthusiastic. "Expanding operations," he repeats, with the careful tone of someone who's learned to be wary when you use military terminology to describe what amounts to recreational violence. "Strategic diversification," you clarify, because apparently you've decided that adding more impressive words will make the concept more palatable. "We're establishing Greek dominance throughout the region. By attacking everyone who isn't Troy. By demonstrating our capabilities," you correct him, though the distinction is admittedly subtle. "Think of it as aggressive diplomacy." Patroclus gives you the look of someone who's just heard a very creative definition of diplomacy. But he doesn't argue further because he's learned that once you've set your mind on something, debate tends to be an exercise in futility. Your first major target is a hero named Sickness, who rules a coastal city and has the unfortunate distinction of being allegedly immune to weapons. This immunity, according to local stories, was granted by his divine father Poseidon, making Sickness essentially a walking advertisement for divine protection. This presents an interesting challenge for someone whose entire reputation is built on killing people with weapons. "He's immune to bronze and iron," one of your scouts reports, with the kind of nervous energy that suggests he's not entirely sure how to deliver bad news to someone with your temperament. "Immune to weapons," you muse, testing the weight of your spear thoughtfully. "How does that work exactly?" "Swords bounce off, spears can't penetrate, arrows just fall away," the scout explains, clearly hoping you won't blame him personally for this inconvenient development. It's an intriguing problem, really. How do you kill someone who can't be killed with the tools of your trade? It's like being asked to cut down a tree with a feather, or drain an ocean with a cup. Fortunately, you've never been one to let technical difficulties stand in the way of a good challenge. The battle with Sickness takes place on the beach outside his city, because dramatic single combats require appropriate staging. He's everything you'd expect from a divinely protected hero, tall, confident, and possessed of the kind of swagger that comes from never having been seriously injured in combat. "Achilles!" he calls out as you approach. his voice carrying the easy authority of someone who's never doubted his own invincibility. "I've heard great things about your skills with weapons." "Have you now?" you reply, because trash talk before combat is traditional, and you've always respected tradition. "Too bad they won't do you any good today," Cycnus continues with a grin that suggests he's genuinely enjoying this conversation. "Bronze can't cut what the gods protect." He's not wrong, technically. Your first few strikes with sword and spear prove completely ineffective. The blades simply refuse to penetrate his skin, as if he's wearing invisible armor crafted by divine blacksmiths. It's profoundly frustrating, like trying to fight someone made of liquid metal. But divine immunity, you realize, has certain limitations. It protects against weapons, but it doesn't necessarily protect against creative applications of physics. So you adapt. Instead of trying to cut Cycnus, you grab him. Instead of stabbing him, you squeeze. Your hands, enhanced by the same divine blood that runs through your veins, prove capable of applying pressure that no amount of supernatural protection can deflect. The strangling that follows is brief but definitive. Cycnus, for all his immunity to bronze and iron, turns out to be quite vulnerable to having his windpipe crushed by someone with supernatural grip strength. Weapons immunity, you observe to his corpse, doesn't cover everything. It's a valuable lesson in the importance of reading the fine print on divine gifts. Your next target is less challenging but significantly more disturbing. Troilus is young, perhaps 16, maybe 17, and has the misfortune to be both Trojan royalty and the subject of a prophecy that says Troy cannot fall while he lives. This makes him a strategic target, which is how you justify to yourself what amounts to hunting down a teenager. You find him at a spring outside Troy's walls, watering his horses in the kind of peaceful morning scene that belongs in pastoral poetry rather than war narratives. He looks up as you approach, and for a moment you see recognition and terror war across his features. He knows who you are, he knows why you're here, and he knows that divine protection doesn't run in his family the way it runs in yours. What follows isn't really a fight so much as a pursuit. Troilus tries to flee, which is the sensible response when confronted by someone whose reputation involves a lot of corpses. But you're faster, stronger, and considerably more experienced at violence. The spear thrust that ends his life is quick and precise, a mercy really, considering what you could have done. But there's no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph or accomplishment, just the mechanical completion of a task that military necessity demanded. Standing over his body, watching his blood seep into the earth around the spring, you feel something that might be regret, or at least the recognition that some victories cost more than they're worth. But the prophecy required it, strategy demanded it, and you've never been one to let personal feelings interfere with military objectives. The pattern continues through the following weeks. City after city, hero after hero, each conquest adding to your reputation while somehow diminishing something else that you can't quite name. Your skill with weapons becomes legendary, your tactical abilities prove formidable, and your name spreads throughout the region like wildfire. The Greeks call it glory and celebrate each victory with the enthusiasm of people who've backed the winning horse. Your fellow heroes offer congratulations and request tactical advice. The common soldiers look at you with the kind of awe usually reserved for natural disasters or divine manifestation. The Trojans, meanwhile, have stopped venturing outside their walls. This should feel like triumph. You've effectively cut off Troy's supply lines, eliminated key defenders, and established such a reputation for invincibility that your enemies are afraid to face you in open combat. By any military standard, you've achieved remarkable success. So why does it feel so empty? You've been quiet lately, Patroclus observes one evening, as you sit by your campfire, staring into the flames with the expression of someone contemplating profound philosophical questions. Have I, you ask, though you suppose it's true. Conversation has felt increasingly pointless lately, like trying to explain colour to someone who's never had eyes. Ever since the Troilus business, he clarifies gently, you haven't seemed yourself. There's something in his tone that suggests he understands more than he's saying. Patroclus has always been good at reading the parts of you that you don't show to anyone else, the doubts and uncertainties that hide behind your legendary confidence. He was just a boy, you say finally, because it's been weighing on you for days and denial isn't working anymore. He was also a strategic target, Patroclus reminds you, though his voice carries no judgment. You did what the war required. Did I? The question comes out more bitter than you intended. Or did I do what my reputation required, what my pride demanded? It's a dangerous line of thought, because it leads to questions about all the other choices you've made, all the other lives you've taken in service of goals you're not entirely sure you understand anymore. The gods have been whispering in your direction, Patroclus says carefully. Your enemies die in imaginative ways. People write songs about your achievements. Maybe you're starting to believe your own mythology. He's not wrong. Somewhere between the divine blood and the centaur training and the accumulating victories, you've begun to think of yourself as something more than human. The line between confidence and arrogance has blurred until you're not sure it exists anymore. But acknowledging that would mean acknowledging that your recent behavior has been driven more by ego than strategy, more by the need to feel superior than by military necessity. And that's a level of self-awareness you're not ready to handle. I'm exactly what I was trained to be, you say instead, which is true as far as it goes, but doesn't address the deeper question of whether what you were trained to be is what the world actually needs. Patroclus nods, but his expression suggests that he's not entirely convinced. Just remember that there's a difference between being legendary and being human. Don't lose track of which one matters more. That night, as you lie in your tent listening to Briseis' steady breathing beside you, you think about his words, about legends and humanity, about glory and cost, about the growing distance between who you were and who you're becoming. Outside, the Greek army sleeps peacefully, confident in their champion's invincibility. Inside Troy's walls, families probably tell their children stories about the terrible Achilles, the monster who kills heroes and princes with equal ease. Both versions feel true, and both feel like someone else entirely. Because nothing says heroic character development like discovering that unlimited power and constant victory might not actually be good for your personality. Success, it turns out, is a remarkably effective drug. Each victory feeds the next craving. Each fallen enemy adds another dose of confidence to an already dangerous addiction. You've now killed so many heroes that you've stopped learning their names beforehand. It seems inefficient to memorize personal details about people you're going to turn into corpses. This probably should concern you more than it does. Instead, you find yourself cataloguing your achievements with the satisfaction of someone reviewing a particularly impressive collection. Cyclus, the weapon immune, strangled. Troilus, the prophetically protected, speared. A dozen other champions whose divine bloodlines and legendary reputations proved insufficient protection against your particular brand of violence. Each victory confirms what you've begun to suspect, that you're not just better than other warriors, you're operating in an entirely different category. They're playing at heroism, you're demonstrating it. They're following scripts written by poets, you're writing new ones with bronze and blood. You're starting to worry me, Patroclus says one morning, interrupting your mental inventory of corpses with the kind of direct honesty that makes you remember why his friendship matters. How so, you ask, though you suspect you know the answer and aren't sure you want to hear it confirmed. You smiled yesterday when that herald brought news about the city that surrendered rather than face you, he explains with the careful tone of someone pointing out symptoms to a patient who doesn't want to admit he's sick. Not a satisfied smile, or a relieved smile, a predator's smile. The observation is uncomfortable because it's accurate. You did smile, and it did feel predatory, and you did enjoy the knowledge that your reputation alone was sufficient to break an enemy's will to fight. There's something intoxicating about that level of fear, that acknowledgement of your supremacy. Demai made the wise choice, you reply, which is technically true but sidesteps the larger point about your reaction to their terror. Demai were terrified, Patroclus corrects gently. Terrified of you, and you liked it. There's no judgment in his voice, just the kind of concerned observation that good friends make when they notice their companions developing unhealthy habits, but the lack of judgment somehow makes it worse, because it forces you to confront the truth of what you're becoming without the comfortable distraction of defensiveness. You are starting to like the fear. You are beginning to enjoy the way conversations stop when you enter a room, the way other warriors step aside when you pass, the way your name has become synonymous with inevitable death. It's validation on a cosmic scale, proof that you're exactly as special as you've always suspected. The problem is that special has a way of becoming isolated, and isolated has a way of becoming inhuman. The gods whisper in my direction, you say, borrowing Patroclus' own words from a previous conversation. My enemies die in imaginative ways. People write songs about my achievements. Maybe I'm supposed to enjoy it. Maybe, Patroclus agrees, though his tone suggests he's not entirely convinced. Or maybe the gods whisper in everyone's direction, and you're just the one who's learned to listen. Which doesn't make you divine, it makes you attentive. It's a perspective you hadn't considered, and one that's distinctly uncomfortable. The idea that your success might be the result of sensitivity rather than superiority, that other heroes might have the same potential but lack the ability to recognize divine guidance. It undermines the fundamental assumption that you're inherently better than everyone else. But you've built so much of your identity around being exceptional that questioning it feels like questioning everything. If you're not uniquely blessed, if you're not fundamentally superior, then what are you? Just another warrior with good reflexes and better publicity? I never lose, you point out, because your track record seems like objective evidence of your special state. You've never lost yet, Patroclus corrects, with the precision of someone who understands the difference between historical fact and future certainty, which isn't the same thing. Are you suggesting I might lose someday? The question comes out more sharply than you intended, but the suggestion feels almost blasphemous. Losing isn't something that happens to you, it's something that happens to other people. I'm suggesting that thinking you can't lose is dangerous, Patroclus replies carefully, not because you're not skilled, but because overconfidence makes people careless, and carelessness gets heroes killed. But carelessness feels like a luxury you can afford. When you're faster than everyone else, stronger than everyone else, more skilled than everyone else, and protected by divine blood that makes you nearly invulnerable, what's the worst that could happen? Your enemies break their weapons against your skin, their strategies crumble before your tactical superiority. Their heroes die when they face you in combat. You've become, in every sense that matters, untouchable. This realization brings with it a peculiar kind of freedom. If you can't lose, if you can't be seriously harmed, if you can't be defeated by any conventional means, then why worry about conventional limitations? Why concern yourself with the opinions of lesser warriors, the fears of enemy cities, the tedious details of military protocol? You begin taking risks that would be suicidal for anyone else, single-handedly assaulting fortified positions, challenging multiple opponents simultaneously, walking openly through areas where enemy archers might be stationed. Each gamble pays off. Each impossible victory adds another layer to your mythology. Each demonstration of invincibility proves that normal rules don't apply to you. The Greek army watches these displays with a mixture of awe and concern. Your fellow heroes alternate between admiration and unease. The common soldiers start treating you less like a commander and more like a force of nature that happens to be on their side. This suits you perfectly. Forces of nature don't need to justify their actions or explain their decisions. They simply are, and everyone else adapts accordingly. You're isolating yourself, Briseis observes one evening, her voice carrying the kind of clinical detachment she uses when pointing out particularly obvious character flaws. I'm rising above petty concerns, you correct, though even as you say it you're aware that it sounds pretentious. Is that what you call it? She asks with the dry humour that's become her signature response to your more grandiose pronouncements. I call it forgetting that you're still human. Am I? The question is more serious than you intended, but it reflects something you've been wondering about lately. The line between human and divine has been blurring for months, and you're not entirely sure which side you're on anymore. Despite all evidence to the contrary, yes, Briseis replies with the kind of patient exasperation usually reserved for explaining obvious facts to children. You bleed when cut, you sleep when tired, you eat when hungry. Very human characteristics. I bleed very little, you point out, because your supernatural durability feels like an important distinction. And I'm cut very rarely. Congratulations, she says with mock solemnity. You've discovered that being difficult to injure makes you harder to injure. Truly, the wisdom of the ages. There's something about her refusal to be impressed by your achievements that's both infuriating and oddly grounding. While everyone else treats you like a living legend, Briseis insists on treating you like a person with an inflated ego and questionable judgment. It's deeply annoying and strangely necessary. The gods favour me, you say, because divine endorsement feels like the ultimate validation of your special status. The gods favour lots of people, she replies with a shrug. They also abandon them when it becomes convenient. I wouldn't count on divine loyalty lasting forever. It's a sobering thought, and one that you immediately reject. Your relationship with the divine isn't like other people's. It's deeper, more fundamental, written into your very existence through your mother's sea goddess blood and your father's heroic lineage. But even as you dismiss her warning, some small part of you wonders whether she might be right. Whether divine favour is as conditional as human friendship, as temporary as military alliance, as fragile as anything else that depends on the whims of beings more powerful than yourself. That night you dream of standing alone on an empty battlefield, surrounded by the corpses of everyone you've ever defeated. In the dream, your victories feel hollow, your reputation meaningless, your legendary status a burden rather than a blessing. You wake with the unsettling feeling that the dream might be prophetic rather than metaphorical. But morning brings new challenges, fresh opportunities to prove your superiority, additional enemies to add to your collection of conquests. The doubts fade in the face of immediate action. The philosophical concerns disappear beneath the rush of combat. The questions about humanity become irrelevant when you're busy demonstrating divinity. After all, why worry about losing your humanity when being inhuman is so much more effective? Because nothing says healthy character development like convincing yourself that you've transcended the limitations that apply to everyone else. You wake one morning to find your tent surrounded by an unusual amount of activity. Not the normal bustle of a military camp preparing for the day's operations, but the kind of purposeful movement that suggests official business is about to intrude on your personal affairs. This is rarely a good sign. Agamemnon stands outside your tent with the bearing of someone who's made a decision he expects you won't like, but intends to implement regardless. He's flanked by enough guards to handle minor uprisings, and carries himself with the particular brand of stubborn authority that comes from being king of kings, and proud of it. Achilles, he greets you with the kind of false warmth that politicians use when they're about to deliver bad news. We need to discuss a matter of some importance. Do we? You reply, because you've learnt to be wary when Agamemnon starts conversations with announcements about necessity. Indeed. His smile has the quality of someone who's practiced it in front of a bronze mirror until it looked appropriately regal. It concerns your recent acquisition from Lyrnessus. Ah, so this is about Briseis. You should have expected this, really. In a coalition army full of ambitious kings and competitive heroes, anything valuable is bound to attract attention eventually. Briseis is my war prize, you state with the kind of flat certainty that usually ends conversations before they become arguments. Was your war prize, Agamemnon corrects with the same false warmth, though his smile is starting to show strain around the edges. Circumstances have changed. Behind you, you can sense Briseis listening to this exchange with the sharp attention of someone whose fate is being decided by people who haven't bothered to consult her. It's probably occurred to her that being treated as property means being transferred like property, without regard for personal preferences or established relationship. What circumstances, you ask, though you suspect you already know where this conversation is heading. My own war prize has become problematic, Agamemnon explains with the delicate phrasing of someone discussing a diplomatic incident. Chryseis, daughter of Chryses, priest of Apollo, her father has been most persistent in demanding her return. So return her, he suggests, because the solution seems obvious and you're not sure why this requires a committee meeting. I would, Agamemnon agrees with the kind of reasonableness that suggests he's about to explain why the obvious solution is actually impossible. But doing so would require acknowledging that a priest's demands supersede a king's authority, which sets an unfortunate precedent for future negotiations. There it is. This isn't actually about Chryseis or her father, or even Apollo's displeasure with the Greek army. This is about Agamemnon's pride and his unwillingness to appear weak in front of his coalition partners. So you're going to keep her and ignore the plague that's been killing our soldiers for the past week, you ask, because the divine retribution angle seems worth mentioning. I'm going to return her, Agamemnon clarifies with the patient tone of someone explaining a complex strategy to a slightly dim student, and replace her with a war prize of equivalent value. Yours, specifically. The audacity of it is almost impressive. Agamemnon has managed to create a crisis through his own stubbornness, and his solution is to resolve it by stealing from you. It's like watching someone set their own house on fire and then demanding to move into yours. No, you say, because sometimes the most effective response is also the simplest one. I beg your pardon? Agamemnon's false warmth evaporates instantly, replaced by the kind of cold authority that comes from being accustomed to immediate obedience. No, you repeat with the same flat certainty, you can't have her. I am not asking for your permission, Agamemnon clarifies with the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I'm informing you of a decision that's already been made. For the good of the army. For the good of your ego, you correct, because pretending this is about military necessity when it's clearly about personal pride seems insulting to everyone's intelligence. The guards shift slightly, hands moving closer to weapon hilts, clearly recognizing the signs of an argument that's about to become physical. Agamemnon notices their movement, and his smile becomes genuinely predatory. I am the commander of this expedition, he states, with the kind of measured authority that suggests he's prepared to enforce his decisions through violence if necessary. My word is law, my commands are absolute, and I command you to surrender your war prize for the greater good of our cause. There's a moment of perfect silence while you process the full implications of what he's just said. Not just that he intends to take Briseis, but that he expects you to accept this theft as a legitimate exercise of his authority. That he believes his title as commander gives him the right to redistribute other people's property at will. The greater good, you repeat slowly, tasting each word like it might be poisonous. You mean the greater good of avoiding the consequences of your own mistakes. I mean the greater good of maintaining unity in this army, Agamemnon replies, with the kind of forced patience that suggests his temper is being held in check by will alone. Which requires that all members, regardless of their personal reputation, remember who commands here. And there it is, the real issue. This isn't about war prizes or divine displeasure or military necessity. This is about Agamemnon feeling threatened by your growing independence. Your casual disregard for traditional authority. Your tendency to make decisions without consulting the chain of command. You've been operating as if you're above the normal hierarchy, and he's decided to remind you that even legendary heroes answer to kings. I won my prize through my own efforts, you point out, because the principle seems important even if the outcome is already predetermined. In a battle you didn't participate in, against enemies you didn't face. All victories in this campaign belong to the expedition as a whole, Agamemnon states, with the kind of logic that sounds reasonable until you think about it. All spoils are subject to redistribution as military necessity requires. Military necessity, you muse, looking around at the assembled guards, the watching soldiers, the carefully orchestrated display of force designed to make resistance seem futile. Is that what we're calling theft now? We're calling it leadership, Agamemnon corrects with a smile that's become openly threatening. The kind of difficult decision that separates kings from warriors. Behind you, Briseis speaks for the first time since this conversation began. Do I get a voice in this redistribution? She asks, with the kind of dry humour that suggests she already knows the answer. War prizes don't typically express preferences, Agamemnon replies without looking at her, his attention fixed entirely on you. They go where they're assigned. How wonderfully civilized, she observes with the acidic politeness she uses when she wants to highlight exactly how uncivilized something actually is. I'm sure future generations will admire the sophisticated way you've reduced human beings to trading commodities. Agamemnon finally glances in her direction, and his expression suggests that he's not particularly impressed by her commentary. Future generations will remember that we took Troy through unity and discipline, not through the ego-driven tantrums of individual heroes. Unity and discipline, you repeat, and something in your tone makes the guards tense visibly. Is that what you call forcing your subordinates to pay for your mistakes? I call it reminding subordinates that they are, in fact, subordinate, Agamemnon replies, with the kind of cold authority that's designed to end arguments through sheer intimidation. But intimidation works both ways, and you've never been particularly impressed by displays of royal authority. Kings rule through the consent of their followers, and your consent has just been officially withdrawn. Take her then, you say, stepping aside with a kind of exaggerated courtesy that makes cooperation feel like an insult. Since your authority is so absolute, and your wisdom so infallible, Agamemnon's eyes narrow slightly, clearly recognizing that your compliance is anything but submission. I'm glad you see reason. Oh, I see it perfectly, you agree with a smile that probably looks as threatening as his did. I see exactly what kind of leader you are, and exactly what this army can expect from your decision-making. What does that mean exactly? Agamemnon asks, though his tone suggests he's not entirely sure he wants to know the answer. Ike means, you say, with the kind of calm that usually precedes catastrophic events, that you can take my war prize, and you can enjoy your authority, and you can lead this army wherever your wisdom directs, but you'll do it without me. The words hang in the air like a challenge thrown down in front of witnesses. Around you, soldiers stop their morning routines to stare at the spectacle of two legendary figures on the verge of open conflict. You're threatening to abandon your duty? Agamemnon asks, and for the first time his voice carries genuine surprise rather than calculated intimidation. I'm informing you that duty is a two-way agreement, you reply with the kind of philosophical precision that makes threats sound like educational lectures, and you've just violated your end of it. My end? Agamemnon's laugh has no humour in it. What possible duty could I owe to you? The duty of fair treatment, you explain with the patience of someone teaching basic concepts to a slow student. The duty of respecting merit, the duty of not stealing from your own allies to cover up your personal failures. I am the king of kings, Agamemnon declares with the kind of emphasis that suggests he's used to this phrase ending arguments. I owe duty to no one. Then you'll discover what it's like to be king of an army that doesn't include its best warrior, you reply, with the kind of calm finality that makes promises feel like prophecies. The confrontation ends not with violence, but with a series of small official actions that somehow feel more devastating than bloodshed. Agamemnon's guards escort Briseis from your tent with the kind of professional courtesy that makes theft look like due process. Your fellow heroes watch from a distance, with expressions that suggest they're not sure whether to be impressed by your defiance or concerned about your judgment. Briseis herself maintains her dignity throughout the transfer, speaking to no one and looking at nothing except the horizon. But as she passes you for what might be the last time, she murmurs just loud enough for you to hear, "Don't let pride make you forget what actually matters." It's good advice, probably. Unfortunately, you're far too angry to take it. That afternoon, you formally withdraw from active participation in the Greek war effort. Not desertion, you're too proud for that, but something more like an extended strike. You'll remain with the army, you'll defend your own men if attacked, but you won't fight Agamemnon's battles or contribute to his victories. If he wants to command without consulting you, he can succeed without your help. This is going to end badly, Patroclus observes that evening as you sit in your tent, conspicuously not planning tomorrow's military operations. For him, you agree with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from watching someone else's problems multiply. For everyone, Patroclus corrects gently, including us. But you're too angry to worry about collateral damage, too proud to consider compromise, too convinced of your own importance to imagine that the war might continue without you. After all, what's the worst that could happen? It's not like Agamemnon can actually win without your help. Because nothing says mature conflict resolution like taking your toys and going home when someone challenges your authority. The morning after your confrontation with Agamemnon, you wake to the sound of an army that's pretending nothing has changed. Soldiers go about their normal routines, commanders hold their usual briefings, and the entire Greek war machine continues operating as if losing its most effective component is merely a minor administrative adjustment. This should probably concern you more than it does. Instead, you find yourself oddly satisfied by the pretense. Let them maintain their facade of normalcy. Let them proceed with their plans as if your absence is irrelevant. Reality has a way of correcting misconceptions, and you suspect yours will make their corrections particularly memorable. So, Patroclus says carefully as he joins you for what used to be your morning strategy session and is now your morning brooding period, what exactly is the plan here? The plan, you reply with the kind of measured calm that suggests you've given this considerable thought, is to demonstrate the difference between an army with Achilles and an army without him. By sitting in our tent. By refusing to fight their battles, you clarify, because the distinction feels important, even if the practical effect is the same. By letting them discover what their coalition warfare looks like when it's missing its most crucial element. Patroclus settles down beside you, with the expression of someone who's about to attempt a delicate conversation. And how long do you imagine this demonstration will take? However long it takes for Agamemnon to admit his mistake and make appropriate reparations, you reply, which sounds reasonable until you consider how often proud kings admit mistakes without external pressure. So, potentially forever? Potentially, you agree, though you suspect it won't actually take that long. Military disasters have a way of clarifying priorities, and Agamemnon will undoubtedly face several, now that he's lost his most effective problem solver. Outside your tent you can hear the sounds of an army preparing for battle, weapons being sharpened, armour being fitted, men psyching themselves up for another day of trying to breach Troy's legendary defences, all the familiar rhythms of warfare, but without your participation. It feels strange, like watching a play you used to star in but are no longer performing. You know all the characters, understand the plot, can predict most of the dialogue, but you're sitting in the audience now, instead of commanding the stage. The men are asking questions, Patroclus reports, with the kind of diplomatic phrasing that suggests the actual questions are less polite than his summary implies. What kind of questions? The kind that start with, "Why is our best warrior?" and end with, "Sitting in his tent like a child having a tantrum." He explains, with the brutal honesty that makes his friendship both valuable and occasionally uncomfortable. "A child having a tantrum," you repeat, tasting the phrase like it might be contaminated. Is that how they see this? Some of them, Patroclus admits, though his tone suggests he's being diplomatic about the actual percentage. Others understand the principle, but they're concerned about the practical implications. Such as the fact that Hector is still alive, Troy's walls are still standing, and we're still sleeping in tents on a beach instead of counting treasure in a conquered city. He explains, with the kind of practical focus that cuts through philosophical justifications like a sword through silk. These are fair points, annoyingly enough. Your strike might be principled, but its immediate effect is to make the already difficult task of conquering Troy even more challenging. The men who'll pay for this principled stand aren't Agamemnon and his fellow kings. They're the common soldiers who'll face Trojan heroes without you there to even the odds. But acknowledging that would require questioning whether your pride is worth other people's lives. And that's a level of moral complexity you're not prepared to handle while still angry about the injustice of your treatment. You will understand when Agamemnon's tactics fail, you say instead, which deflects the moral question while maintaining your position. When his strategies prove inadequate and his leadership shows its limitations. And if people die while we're waiting for him to fail, Patroclus asks with the kind of direct question that cuts to the heart of uncomfortable truths. People die in wars, you reply, which is accurate, but doesn't address whether people should die unnecessarily to prove points about respect and authority. Our people, Patroclus clarifies gently, our friends, our allies, men who fought beside us and trusted us to fight beside them. There's something in his voice that suggests this isn't just hypothetical concern, but genuine fear about specific individuals, people he knows, relationships he values, connections that make abstract principles feel like personal betrayals. They'll understand, he repeats, though you're less certain now than you were a moment ago, when they see what happens without proper leadership. Will they, Patroclus asks, or will they see what happens when proper leadership is undermined by personal grudges? It's an uncomfortable question because it reframes your principled stand as something more selfish and less noble. Instead of defending important principles about respect and fair treatment, you might simply be prioritizing your wounded pride over your military obligations. But wounded pride feels like an inadequate description for what Agamemnon did. It wasn't just disrespect, it was theft, abuse of authority, the kind of arbitrary exercise of power that makes coalition warfare impossible. If you accept this treatment, what's to stop him from taking more whenever it's convenient? It's not about personal grudges, you say, though even as you say it, you're aware that it sounds defensive. It's about setting boundaries that prevent future abuse. Noble, Patroclus agrees with the kind of tone that suggests nobility and practicality don't always align, but boundaries are usually set through negotiation, not through abandoning your responsibility. I tried negotiation, you point out, though you're not entirely sure that one heated argument counts as a comprehensive diplomatic effort. Agamemnon wasn't interested in reasonable solutions. So now you're not interested in any solutions at all. The question hangs between you like a challenge, and you find yourself without a ready answer. What started as a principled stand is beginning to feel more like a corner you've painted yourself into, a position that's easier to maintain than to abandon, but harder to justify with each passing hour. I'm interested in appropriate acknowledgement of what I contribute to this army, you say finally, which is both true and carefully avoids addressing the larger questions about obligation and compromise. From your tent, Patroclus observes with the kind of gentle irony that makes obvious points feel like philosophical insights. From wherever I choose to make my contributions, you correct, though the distinction is becoming increasingly academic. Outside, the sounds of military preparation are giving way to the sounds of departure. Troops forming up, officers shouting orders, the general commotion of an army heading into battle without its most famous warrior. Part of you wants to join them, to take your place in the formation and lead from the front as you've always done. The familiar rhythms of warfare call to something fundamental in your nature, something that finds purpose and clarity in the organized chaos of combat. But a larger part of you recognizes that joining them now would undermine everything you've said about principles and respect and appropriate treatment. It would validate Agamemnon's assumption that you'll always be available when needed, regardless of how you're treated when not needed. So you remain in your tent, listening to your army march toward battle without you, and try to convince yourself that this is leadership rather than abandonment. What if they lose? Patroclus asks quietly, giving voice to the fear that's been growing in your mind since this morning. Demai won't lose, you say with more confidence than you feel. They're still the finest army ever assembled. Missing its finest warrior, he reminds you with the kind of uncomfortable precision that makes self-deception difficult. Be mine, he replies, though you're not entirely sure what that adaptation might look like, or whether it will be sufficient. And if they don't? The question follows you through the day as reports filter back from the battlefield. The Greeks advance, the Trojans resist. Combat is joined with the usual mixture of heroism and horror. But, without your presence to tip the balance, the outcome is less certain than it's been in months. By evening, the reports have become concerning. The Greeks have been pushed back from Troy's walls, several minor heroes have been wounded, and morale is noticeably lower than usual. Not a disaster, but not the easy victory that everyone had come to expect from Greek military operations. Still convinced this is the right approach, Patroclus asks as you review the day's events? Still convinced it's the necessary approach, you reply, though necessity and rightness seem like increasingly different concepts. That night, you lie awake listening to the sounds of an army that's discovered what uncertainty feels like. The confident conversations are quieter, the victory celebrations are smaller, and the general atmosphere suggests that people are beginning to understand what your absence actually means. This should feel like vindication. Instead, it feels like the first step towards something you're not sure you'll be able to control. Because nothing says effective leadership like proving your value by refusing to provide it. Three days into your strike, and the Greek army is beginning to develop what military historians will probably call structural integrity issues, which is a polite way of saying that everything is falling apart without you there to hold it together. The reports that filter back to your tent paint an increasingly grim picture. Yesterday's assault on Troy's eastern gate failed when Hector led a counterattack that drove the Greeks back to their own fortifications. This morning's attempt to establish a forward position near the city walls ended with a retreat that looked suspiciously like a rout. And this afternoon's strategic reconnaissance turned into a running battle that the Greeks won only by abandoning their objectives and fleeing to safety. It's exactly what you predicted would happen, which should make you feel vindicated. Instead, you find yourself experiencing an emotion that might be regret if you were the sort of person who admitted to making mistakes. Agamemnon sent an envoy, Patroclus reports as he returns from what's become his daily tour of the camp's gossip networks. Officially to check on your health and express concern about your absence from military operations. And unofficially, to see if you might be interested in discussing terms for your return to active duty, he explains with the diplomatic phrasing that makes capitulation sound like negotiation. This is progress of a sort. 3 days ago, Agamemnon was insisting that your participation was optional and your opinions were irrelevant. Now he's sending envoys to explore the possibility of reconciliation. The gap between those positions suggests that reality is beginning to correct his misconceptions about your value to the army. What kind of terms, you ask, because curiosity about his desperation seems like a reasonable indulgence. The envoy was rather vague, Patroclus admits, but he mentioned the possibility of additional honours, increased autonomy in tactical decisions, and perhaps some form of acknowledgement that your contributions have been underappreciated. Underappreciated, you repeat, savouring the word like fine wine. Is that what we're calling theft and abuse of authority now? Patroclus agrees, with the kind of dry humour that suggests he's not particularly impressed by Agamemnon's vocabulary choices, though he did seem genuinely concerned about the military situation, as he should be, you observe with the satisfaction of someone whose predictions are being confirmed by events. Troy isn't going to conquer itself. No, Patroclus agrees, though his tone suggests that he's considering implications beyond the immediate military problems. But neither are the Trojans going to remain passive while we sort out our internal disputes. It's a good point, and one that's been nagging at you for the past day or so. Your strike is putting pressure on Agamemnon, but it's also giving Troy's defenders time to recover, regroup, and potentially gain the initiative in ways that could prove difficult to reverse. Wars have their own momentum, and you've effectively stopped yours while your enemies maintain theirs. Strategically speaking, this is the sort of decision that looks clever in the short term and catastrophic in the long term. But acknowledging that would require admitting that your principles might be less important than practical considerations, and you've invested too much pride in this position to abandon it now. The Trojans have always been passive, you point out, which is technically true, even if it ignores recent changes in their behaviour. They're defenders, not attackers. Beni were defenders when they thought they were facing the entire Greek army, Patroclus corrects gently. Now, they're facing the Greek army minus its most effective component. That might change their strategic calculations. Before you can respond to this uncomfortable observation, a commotion outside your tent announces the arrival of visitors. Not the subtle approach of messengers or the casual visits of friends, but the kind of official procession that suggests important people with serious business. The tent flap parts to reveal Ajax, Odysseus, and Phoenix, 3 of the most respected leaders in the Greek army, here in their official capacity as Agamemnon's designated negotiators. Their expressions suggest that this is a diplomatic mission rather than a social call. Achilles' Ajax begins with the kind of formal courtesy that indicates carefully prepared remarks. We've come to discuss the current situation. Have you? You reply with the kind of polite interest that suggests you're willing to listen, but not necessarily to cooperate. The army needs its greatest warrior, Odysseus states with his characteristic directness. The king recognizes that certain adjustments to previous decisions might be warranted. Adjustments, you muse, apparently having developed a fondness for repeating euphemisms with subtle mockery. How delightfully diplomatic. He's prepared to return Briseis, Phoenix adds with the kind of emphasis that suggests this concession required considerable internal debate, along with additional compensation for the inconvenience you've experienced. The inconvenience, you repeat, and your tone makes the phrase sound like a particularly inadequate description of armed theft. How thoughtful of him to acknowledge my inconvenience. He's also willing to grant you increased autonomy in tactical matters, Ajax continues, apparently determined to work through their entire list of incentives, and formal recognition of your contributions to the campaign's success. It's a reasonable offer, objectively speaking. More than reasonable, actually. It gives you everything you originally demanded, plus additional concessions that address your concerns about respect and authority. Any rational person would accept these terms and return to the business of winning the war. Unfortunately, rational people don't usually find themselves in positions where their personal honor becomes a matter of public spectacle. "Tell me," you say with the kind of conversational tone that suggests genuine curiosity rather than rhetorical questions, "what's changed Agamemnon's mind about my value to this expedition?" The three envoys exchange glances with the subtle coordination of people who've discussed this exact question and aren't entirely comfortable with their answer. The king has had time to reflect on the broader strategic picture. Odysseus explains with the diplomatic evasiveness that makes obvious truths sound like complex insights. "The broader strategic picture," you repeat thoughtfully. "Would that include yesterday's failed assault, this morning's retreat, and this afternoon's rout?" "There have been some tactical setbacks," Ajax admits, with the kind of understatement that makes disasters sound like minor inconveniences. "Tactical setbacks," you muse, apparently finding this euphemism even more entertaining than the previous ones. "How many men did we lose in these tactical setbacks?" "Some," Phoenix says carefully, clearly reluctant to provide specific numbers that might make the setback sound less tactical and more catastrophic. "Some," you echo with the kind of measured calm that makes questions feel like accusations. "And how many of those losses might have been prevented if Agamemnon had chosen different approaches to authority and respect?" It's a harsh question, and probably an unfair one. The casualties of war aren't usually attributable to single decisions about personnel management. But fairness feels less important than making sure your point is understood. Actions have consequences. And Agamemnon's actions have led to consequences he's trying to resolve by undoing those actions. "The past cannot be changed," Odysseus observes with the kind of philosophical wisdom that sidesteps moral responsibility while acknowledging practical reality. "But the future can be influenced by decisions made today." "Indeed it can." You agree with a smile that probably doesn't look particularly friendly. The question is what kind of future we're trying to influence. A future where Troy falls and the Greek army returns home victorious, Ajax states with the kind of straightforward honesty that cuts through diplomatic complexity. A future where kings remember that authority requires consent, you counter with equal directness, and that consent requires respect. "Both," Phoenix suggests with the diplomatic optimism of someone trying to find middle ground between irreconcilable positions, "both futures achieved through mutual accommodation and renewed cooperation." It's a nice thought, really, the idea that personal principles and military objectives can be harmonized through reasonable compromise, that wounded pride and practical necessity can coexist within the same strategic framework. But you've spent 3 days discovering what it feels like to have your principles respected through demonstrated consequences rather than negotiated agreements. And that feeling has proven surprisingly addictive. "I'll consider the offer," you say finally, which is both true and completely non-committal. "How long might that consideration require?" Odysseus asks, with the patient tone of someone who understands that timing matters in military situations. "However long it takes," you reply, with the kind of answer that sounds cooperative while avoiding any actual commitments. The envoys depart with expressions that suggest they're not entirely sure whether their mission has succeeded or failed. You've listened to their offer, acknowledged its merits, and promised to consider it seriously, but you haven't actually agreed to anything, which leaves everyone in the same uncomfortable position they were in before the negotiation began. That evening, as you sit in your tent listening to the sounds of an army that's still pretending everything is normal, you reflect on the strange turn your life has taken. A week ago, you were the undisputed star of the Greek war effort, the hero everyone counted on to solve impossible problems and win unwinnable battles. Now you're the source of the army's problems, the absence that's making victory seem uncertain and defeat seem possible. It's like being a physician who cures diseases by refusing to treat patients. Technically effective at proving your importance, but ethically questionable in terms of actual outcomes. Patroclus finds you in this mood of philosophical contemplation, mixed with practical uncertainty, carrying 2 cups of wine and the expression of someone who's decided that direct conversation is preferable to continued diplomatic dancing around obvious issues. Briseis, when she's finally returned to your tent the next morning, finds you in this mood of philosophical contemplation mixed with practical uncertainty. See, she says as she surveys your accommodations with the critical eye of someone evaluating a prison cell she's being returned to. How's the tantrum going? It's not a tantrum, you protest, though you're aware that the distinction is becoming increasingly academic. It's a principled stand against abuse of authority. Of course it is, she agrees, with the kind of tone that makes agreement sound like mockery. And how are your principles working out for the men who've died while you've been taking your principled stand? It's the question you've been avoiding for 3 days, and hearing it stated so directly feels like a physical blow. Because the answer is that your principles are working out very badly for those men, and their deaths are at least partially attributable to your absence from the battles they fought without you. BMI died for a worthy cause, you say, though even as you say it, you're not sure whether you're referring to the war itself or your strike against Agamemnon's authority. Did they? Briseis asks with the kind of direct challenge that makes comfortable rationalizations impossible to maintain. Or did they die because their greatest defender was sitting in his tent, sulking about wounded pride? It's not about wounded pride, you insist, though you're beginning to wonder whether pride and principle are actually different things, or just different names for the same fundamental concern with personal dignity. Isn't it? She asks with the kind of gentle curiosity that makes questions feel like invitations to honest self-examination. What would it look like if it were about wounded pride? How would that be different from what's actually happening? You don't have a good answer for that, which is probably an answer in itself. That night you lie awake, thinking about principles and pride, about individual dignity and collective responsibility, about the gap between what you intended to accomplish and what you've actually achieved. Outside your tent, the Greek army sleeps uneasily, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of fighting without their champion. Inside your tent, you wrestle with the growing suspicion that principled stands and destructive tantrums might be more similar than you'd like to admit. But admitting that would require abandoning the position you've taken, and you've never been particularly good at admitting. Because nothing says mature leadership like discovering that your principles might be less important than their consequences, and deciding to maintain your principles anyway. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us for another installment of Achilles' Journey, where military success and personal growth prove to be surprisingly incompatible goals. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories come from learning when not to fight, though that's a lesson some heroes take longer to learn than others.